Hello, welcome to our Introduction to Personality series course, and we continue studying so-called intrapsychic domain. And last lecture, we were discussing different theories connected with motivation, because in this group of theories, researchers suppose that if we know the motivation, we can understand the person. So motivation is considered to be key to understanding the whole personality. In last video, we discussed Henry Murray's theory of motivation and so-called the big three motives: need for achievement, need for power, and need for affiliation. In this video, we will discuss Abraham Maslow's theory of motivation, Carl Rogers' views on motivation, and modern theory of self-determination proposed by the CNF. So before we will start diving into Abraham Maslow's theory, I suppose it would be nice to consider his biography, because the time he lived and certain aspects of his biography heavily influence his theoretical views. So one of his quotes is, "What one can be, one must be." I think it well represents his whole idea about human growth and potential. He was born in a Jewish family. His parents actually fled Russian Empire at the beginning of 20th century due to pogroms. So Russian Empire, unfortunately, was very anti-Semitic, and there were a lot of pogroms. So a lot of people of Jewish ancestry fled Russia, and Maslow's parents actually fled to the United States. So his actual last name initially was Maslow, but he changed the last letter to sound more American style. He was the eldest of 7 children, so his family was very, very poor, and they had almost no money because it was already very expensive to raise children, and living in the city as an immigrant family was very hard for them. In New York, he also faced ethnic hatred, so he actually had problems with local gangs, and they chased him and sometimes threw rocks into Maslow just because he was a Jewish person, which was awful but very typical for the United States in the first half of 20th century. It was a very different society from what we know right now. It was full of racism, sexism, homophobia, and ethnic hatred, unfortunately. So Maslow still was a brilliant student, and he managed to get into university, which was a significant achievement because he was the first person in his family who got a higher education university degree. But originally, he was a behaviorist. The thing is, in the United States in the first half of 20th century, most of academic psychologists were behaviorists, while most of psychotherapists and practicing psychologists were psychoanalysts. So Maslow, who studied in university, originally conducted research as a behaviorist, but later he became one of the most influential critics of behaviorism. He worked alongside with Ruth Benedict and Max Wertheimer. Max Wertheimer is the founder of Gestalt psychology after World War II. Because of Nazis in the Second World War, a lot of psychologists, especially with Jewish ancestry, immigrated from Europe into the United States. And Maslow, who lived in New York, actually benefited from collaboration and communication with those professors and doctors, because they brought a lot of original ideas which the United States psychologists didn't know or didn't know that well. And this facilitated collaboration actually led to the emergence of new schools of thought in the United States psychology. So his experience in communication and collaboration with European psychologists actually influenced his scientific creativity later. Unfortunately, he died early in the age of 62 years old, only due to severe heart attack. So he had health problems. So Maslow worked and lived in a very unique time because the United States before World War II and after World War II were very different countries, actually, culturally and socially speaking. So it influenced his whole scientific legacy. So Maslow supposed that we can classify all the needs people have into two big groups, so-called deficiency needs and so-called being needs. In the last lecture, I introduced a so-called principle of homeostasis, which can be applied to the motivation. So a quick reminder, homeostasis principle regarding motivation means that you have some comfort level of tension within you. And when the tension increases due to lack or deficit of something, you try to remove this tension and return back to initial comfort state. So Maslow supposed that some of human needs work that way, and he calls them deficiency. For example, if you want to eat, yes, it works like that. So you experience deficit of calories, you start to experience discomfort and tension, you try to find something to eat, you feel satisfaction, and you return back to initial level of tension, comfort zone tension. You removed the deficit, everything is good. So, but Maslow supposed that not all human needs work like that. For example, why we read smart books and want to learn something new, right? It doesn't remove any deficit needed for your survival and even well-being. So actually reading smart books increases tension because you need to put a lot of effort. You might experience difficulties with concentration and attention focus. So it actually increases tension, not decreases to a comfort zone, but people still have those needs. And Maslow supposed that we should call them so-called being needs or just be needs. Maslow tried to develop his theory based on what he knew about the culture. Actually, Maslow was quite self-aware, and in most of his books, he pays a lot of attention to that factor, saying, yes, my theory is applicable for Western culture. It might be not applicable for Asian, African, Latin American cultures because they're different. So he was very self-aware and noticing that, yes, his hierarchy of need might be not applicable or not fully applicable. It's not universal for all the countries. So Maslow supposed that needs are hierarchically organized. It means that some needs are more important and more urgent to satisfy, while some needs are less important compared to those ones. So the most important needs situated at the bottom of hierarchy, while the least important needs situated at the top of hierarchy. It's what some students unfortunately are confused about. So actually, the real hierarchy of needs looks like that. And if you're an attentive reader and listener, probably you see that it's different from most of pictures in the textbook because it has additional two layers here, aesthetical and cognitive needs. Actually, if you read the main book of Maslow, Motivation and Personality, his magnum opus, it includes aesthetical and cognitive needs there. But unfortunately, somewhy, most of the textbooks you are using the oversimplified version, which excludes those two levels. So Maslow suppose they're actually very important. So Maslow supposed that physiological safety, love and belonging, and esteem and self-esteem are deficiency needs, so they work according to the principle of homeostasis, while cognitive, aesthetical, and self-actualization needs are so-called being needs, which based on heterostasis principle, the principle of raising tension. So the quick reminder, so physiological needs is mostly food, sleep, sex, classical examples. You basically start fulfilling your needs from that level because if you didn't slept and you didn't eat anything, you probably don't care about anything else which is above that level. So you just need to satisfy those needs just to survive. So putting sex into the physiological level actually a bit tricky because you can't survive without sex perfectly fine. So, and sex has a lot of like social and emotional aspects, which make it not completely physiological process. So that where Maslow received some portion of criticism. But still, the second level is safety. So if you survived, uh, you got some food, you slept a bit, you want to be in a safe environment. You don't want to be killed, you don't want to be robbed, you don't want to be raped, right? You need to be in somewhat predictable environment where there are certain rules and you're not afraid going to sleep and communicate with other people. So in most Western societies where the police is working and people follow some rules and there are laws and uh, different regulations, most of people feel perfectly safe, right? You know how everything is working. The environment is predictable. But once you get into certain regions, for example, during the war, this need might be frustrated. Our need in safety was very strongly frustrated during COVID pandemic because everybody was really afraid how safe they are, what will happen with their health, how dangerous this new virus is, and so on. So we got a lot of new policies regarding healthcare aspects of this pandemic. But if everything is good, you after that you want to communicate with other people. You just want to find friends, people to chat with, maybe someone with whom you will fall in love. So we constantly need communication. People are social animals, and we try to fulfill this love and belonging need. According to Maslow, it's situated on the third level of the hierarchy. But once you got included into group, you don't want just to belong to this group. You want to have a high social status in this group. You want to be respected. You want people to follow your advice. You want people to ask your opinion. And in this sense, we're going to the fourth level, the need for esteem and self-esteem. So Maslow suppose that our self-esteem is mostly based on the esteems we collect from other people. So if other people suppose that, yeah, we're a great person, we deserve respect, we also start to develop high self-esteem. The opposite might happen. So people want some recognition. Uh, it's all D needs. So according to Maslow, if you satisfied those four layers, it's easier for you to go to higher levels of hierarchy. Though Maslow never wrote that you should go one level after another, this order is not completely strict. So you actually can jump through several layers. Maslow just wrote that it's just easier to go one level after another. It's just easier. So cognitive needs connected with learning new information. It might be watching educational YouTube videos, reading books, going to museums, right? So it can be different types of activities, but people want to learn new information. They want to study. They want to learn more about the world and the universe. Right? It's higher level need. You can survive without that, and you can be very well respected person in your community without that. But many people experience that. So if you study personality psychology and you watch this video, probably you have high cognitive needs because you want to study. So aesthetical needs are based on our desire to be surrounded by beautiful things and people. Each person have different understanding of what beautiful is, but we try to find clothes which suit us and fit our views on what is beautiful and aesthetic. You choose, wallpapers in your apartment. You buy different furniture and items. You try to have a nice screensaver on your personal computer or cell phone. It's you choose the music you will listen and places where you will make photos for Instagram, for example. You choose your avatar in social networks based on your aesthetic needs. So time after time, we all experience that. There's another problem that people might have conflicting understanding of what is beautiful, and actually it's a subject of debates, arguments, and sometimes conflicts between people, what is beautiful and what is not, what is tasteful and what is not. So we not necessarily have the similar understanding, but most people time after time experience this need. And finally, on the top is need for self-actualization, which Maslow supposed is the highest level need. So the definition of self-actualization is actually very broad and general. So this concept is hard to measure. So it makes it almost philosophical. And Maslow, historically speaking, offers several bit different definitions of what self-actualization is. So on the slide, you can see the definition of 1962. So self-actualization can be described as a complete realization of one's potential as manifest in peak experiences, which involves the full development of one's abilities and appreciation for life. So this whole idea that people have this potential, each person have a potential, positive potential, which they can realize in their life, was completely revolutionary in 1950s. So nowadays it became the part of mass culture, and every single person is completely sure that of course they have this hidden positive potential, they can develop, they have different gifts and talents, and they just need a certain environment and amount of money and conditions just to show it. But in 1950s, society was very different. So it was a time of racial segregation, sexism, homophobia, ethnic hatred. And most people suppose that poor people, people who lack money, are responsible for their problems. It's not social injustice. They are just lazy, for example, and they didn't want to support social programs to help those people because they suppose they just need to work more. And the whole views on social justice and human potential were different. So Maslow, by introducing those ideas, was a completely revolutionary the field. Right? So nowadays it became a part of mass culture and seems so obvious. 70 years ago, it was absolutely brand new idea. So Maslow's theory impact. As I said, most of Maslow's ideas actually became a part of mass culture, and his hierarchy of need is often quoted not only by psychologists, but also by marketologists and HRs and other professionals. So the problem became the part of mass culture in oversimplified way. So sometimes we miss those two levels in hierarchy of needs. Sometimes people misinterpret these hierarchy levels, how you go from one level to another. Sometimes people think it's universal for all cultures and so on. So Maslow's theory became the subject of misinterpretation by many people. Researchers try to find some evidence to this concept because Maslow didn't conduct almost any research. He just wrote books about what he thinks about motivation. So not surprisingly, a lot of researchers try to find evidence which proving it right and wrong. We have some limited data which supports the idea of lower level and higher level needs, and that lower level needs are stronger when deprived. So some part of researchers try to create hierarchy of needs applicable for other cultures. For example, Edwin Lewis, American psychologist of Chinese ancestry, tried to create alternative hierarchy for Eastern cultures, where he placed greater importance on collective well-being and achievement. And in this model, need to belong and love is at the bottom of hierarchy and is more important than physiological needs. It's actually interesting. But all such attempts to create alternative hierarchy of needs received a lot of criticism because you can choose a different basis for classification. You can list the different number of needs included into this hierarchy. And there is no one logical correct answer to tackle this problem. So unfortunately, all attempts to create universal hierarchy of needs based on Maslow's ideas are not successful nowadays. So another important figure in humanistic psychology and views on motivation developed into this school of psychological thought was Carl Rogers. So one of his famous quotes is, "I'm not perfect, but I'm enough." I think this quote perfectly represents his approach, especially to psychotherapy. His father was a civil engineer, mother was a housewife, and his family was very religious. So he joined university, but he couldn't choose his major, as many students nowadays. So initially he studied agriculture, history, and religion. And he even entered the seminary and wanted to become a pastor, but changed his mind and even became an atheist. So it's a huge change in his life. He's got his PhD in clinical psychology relatively late in his life when he was 38. But he became such a prominent psychologist that he even served as a president of American Psychological Association. This is very honorable title. Only very famous and influential psychologists got this post. So at the age of 85, he made a trip to the Soviet Union, where he conducted a series of lectures and seminars. It's also an interesting fact. And what we know about Rogers. So Rogers is famous because of creating so-called the client-centered approach to psychotherapy. So it was an alternative to psychoanalytic approach into psychotherapy and all psychodynamic theories. So basically, he introduced several concepts which became the part of almost any psychotherapy nowadays. But again, 70 years ago, it was completely revolutionary. So two of those concepts are active listening and empathy. So empathy involves experiencing with another person, perceiving their hopes, fears through immersion in empathetic process, but without feeling them yourself. So Rogers introduced that idea that you understand that another person feels without feeling that. Empathy is different from identification. When you identify with a person, you try to put yourself on the place of that person and think and feel what you would feel and think. With empathy, you don't try that. You just try to understand what person feels and thinks, not what you would feel on their place. So it's different. And empathy is a skill. So according to Rogers, you actually can learn empathy and can become a better listener and a better emotional supporter if you train it correctly. Another set of techniques and concepts is so-called active listening. It's a set of techniques which creates an impression that you actively listening to a person, you're invested in the conversation. It's very important for you. So psychotherapists should do that. What was the difference? Dynamic psychotherapy in the United States often worked based on the principle that there is a psychotherapist and a patient. And a patient, a person who has a disorder, problems, or deficits. And this therapy was based on the idea of hierarchy that psychoanalysts is more educated and knows better what is good for the patients, and they treat them. And often this type of psychotherapy didn't involve sitting in front of each other. They often use this sofa, which you could see in movies, where a patient lies on the sofa and psychoanalyst sits behind, and the client doesn't see analyst, but analyst sees a patient. So there was a lot of hierarchical aspects in this type of relationships. Rogers revolutionized the field because he said, no, they're not our patients, they're our clients, and we're equals. And psychotherapist doesn't know better than a client how to live their life. He introduced this idea that they're sitting in front of each other, seeing each other, and communicating, which was revolutionary. And that it's important to show clients that you're invested in the conversation by maintaining eye contact, nodding, repeating some phrases, asking clarifying questions, and so on, that this facilitates the process of communication between psychotherapist and the client. So according to Rogers, the leading motive for a person is also self-actualization. So here they were on the same page with Abraham Maslow. The definitions of self-actualizations are a bit different. So Rogers understood it as a preservation and development of oneself, maximum identification of the best qualities of one's personality inherent in nature. So it's slightly different. According to Rogers, fully functioning person is a person who on the way to self-actualization, and human motivation doesn't work on the principle of reducing stress or homeostasis principle we mentioned before, but based on the principle of striving to growth or heterostasis principle of increasing tension. So important part of Rogers' theory is so-called self-concept. The self-concept is organized, consistent set of perceptions and beliefs about oneself. So self-concept is a subjective representation of a person about himself, about his interaction with the world, as well as the values associated with these representations. So the self-concept is comprehensible, but not necessarily conscious. So you have some beliefs and perceptions about yourself which you do not reflect exactly, but they still affect your behavior and motivation. So a couple of other concepts important for this theory. First, the so-called congruence is the idea that your expressed behavior matches your internal states. Because often we are incongruent. For example, you're smiling and you're saying everything is fine, but deeply inside you're very sad and frustrated, right? Parts of like American and Canadian culture actually reward incongruence, which is not good according to Rogers. When people ask you, how do you do? How are you? You say, I'm great, fine, perfect, all right. Almost always it's not true, right? So you need to smile and you need to be polite, even if you don't want to and you're angry and frustrated. You have small talks, even if you don't want to communicate with people right now because it would be impolite. So according to Rogers, people need to increase their congruence and express their true emotions and feelings. And when you are more congruent, you feel less psychological problems and you feel better. So the main, one of the main purposes of client-centered approach to increase congruence, and because of that, ease psychological problems people might experience. So in this sense, incongruence is a gap between the real and the ideal self, right? So you want to seem better, you want to be perfect, but you're always not perfect. You're real you with all the flaws you have. And if you can accept yourself as you are without an attempt to be perfect, you become congruent. You can be yourself not a different person, not trying to pretend being a different person. After that, you feel better, you have less anxiety, less depression, and less other problems, according to client-centered approach. So the development of the self-concept starts in early childhood, starting from infancy, and affected by the factor of the desire for positive regards. Children want to be loved and accepted by parents and other people. It's very important. It's a basic need, according to Rogers, that we need this love, acceptance, and positive regard. It's essential for our well-being and survival. The thing is that positive regard can be conditional. You receive love and acceptance if you do something right. So, for example, if you got A at school, parents praise you. If you got D at school, your parents deprive you with love and acceptance, right? You need to deserve it. It's conditional positive regard. Rogers supposed that it's harmful for well-being of children, and he introduced the idea of so-called unconditional positive regard. So the idea is that you should love your children no matter what they're doing. It doesn't matter, are they studying well at school or not? Are they misbehaving or not? Are they making you happy or not? Do they have high salary or not? You show love and affection, and it positively influences children's well-being. This idea of unconditional positive regard also became popular in Western culture, and I think it's affected the whole difference which we now have between Western parenting and so-called Asian parenting, right? So most of like so-called Asian parenting is based on conditional positive regard. You need to study well, you need to obey your parents and elder relatives, you need to follow their orders and commands. If you do that, you're a good boy, you're a good girl, you deserve respect, love, and acceptance. But if you're not doing that, you're a bad person, you should do better, right? This whole idea. So it was typical for America and Europe as well in the first half of 20th century. But after Rogers introduced his ideas, things started to change. Nowadays, in many Western countries, this idea of unconditional positive regard became more popular, and it affected the whole parenting style, how we do that. So yes, actually, like from the point of mental well-being, yes, children really need this unconditional positive regard, but it not necessarily positively affects their success in life. So it's just two different factors. Well-being and success, social success, not always coincide, unfortunately. So it's different entities. And finally, we need to cover self-determination theory, one of the modern theories of motivation, introduced by Edward Deci and Richard Ryan. So actually, Deci and Ryan were affected by humanistic psychology, and it was their source of inspiration. But the huge difference is that they wanted to build evidence-based theory of motivation, which is built on research findings and can be proven right or wrong, thus falsifiable, and deeply rooted in research. And they did it. So the theory of self-determination, according to their authors, aims to identify the factors that feed the innate human potential that determines growth, integration, and health, and to explore the process and conditions that contribute to healthy development and effective functioning of individuals, groups, and communities. Right? Reading these quotes should remind you about some ideas of humanistic psychologists. We see this innate human potential, growth, conditions, how to contribute and be more effective, and those positive things, it's actually like some of values of humanistic psychology. So the basic concept of self-determination theory is not surprisingly self-determination. So the self-determination refers to the ability to choose and have a choice, in contrast to reinforced reactions, satisfaction of drives, and actions under the influence of other forces. So it's opposite of determination. Determination is the situation when you behave a certain way because you got affected by some external and internal factors. It's not your decision. You're forced to do something. But self-determination is activities and behavior which you start because you decided to do that. So self-determination concept is based on the concept of free will from philosophy, the idea that you can choose what to do. So DC and Ryan suppose that some of our behavior is determined, right? For example, you hear a loud sound and you turn your head, right? It's a reflective reaction. It's determination, right? Sometimes you make impulsive buys at the grocery store because you got into the trap of marketologists and advertisement. Yes, it's determined behavior. Yeah, it happens on an everyday life basis. But you also have an ability to choose yourself. You decide, for example, to which university apply, which courses you will take each semester, where you will work, and who, for example, who will be your spouse, and so on. So there is always room for both determination and self-determination, but self-determination is important. So this concept makes this theory different from, for example, behaviorist views on motivation, Clark Hall's drive theory, and other theories within American psychology. So own internal choice, but your choice always exists in objectively existing restrictions, right? You cannot choose everything you want. You choose from what you can choose, right? For example, you might wish to have $1 billion and spend it on something. But objectively speaking, probably you don't have $1 billion. So you choose how to spend the money you have, right? So you don't have unlimited opportunities. You choose from what you have, what is accessible. So empirical criteria of self-determination. So how we can distinguish between behavior based on self-determination and behavior based on just determination. So criteria, spontaneity, creativity, interest, and personal significance as the causes of action, feeling free, and some speech patterns like, for example, you say, I want to do something instead of I must do something. If you say, I must do something, I should do something, it's external necessity, which is important, but it's not your choice. You must, you should. It's different from I want and I like when you choose something because you can. Right? So we can distinguish that, though I suppose those criteria are a bit vague. So it's a weak point of this theory, but still is better than nothing. So non-self-determined behavior is behavior which is completely determined by physical or psychological causes or environment. Non-self-determined behavior can be like habits, inflexible behavior, behavior controlled by emotions, and all those types of behavior prevent the choice and flexible use of information. You just do without thinking about what's happening. The key concepts of self-determination theory is actually extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. Those concepts were introduced in self-determination theory, and I'm pretty sure that you heard about this difference between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. It's usually the part of Introduction to Psychology course. So what actually is the difference? Intrinsic motivation triggers activity because the subject is interested and satisfied with the activity process themselves. For example, usually people play computer games just because they want to play the game, right? They like the activity themselves itself. But extrinsic motivation is when you're active and you're doing something, not for doing that, but for getting something because of you doing that. For example, you want to get money, right? You don't like your job, but you do it anyways because you need salary. It's extrinsic motivation, but you might also do your job because you love what you're doing, right? So there is a role for intrinsic motivation. So on the picture, you might see two boys playing soccer or football, and one is motivated because he just likes to play this game, and another wants to win a cup, right? So this is the difference between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. So according to self-determination theory, it's always better for your well-being to be intrinsically motivated, and it is just makes your life more meaningful and you will have less psychological problem. But of course, as I mentioned before in previous videos, the real motivation and activity always polymotivated. So you might have several motives at once, and some of them can be intrinsic and some of them can be extrinsic. It's usual case, right? So even people who really love their job, they're still concerned about money because it's just important for survival. So they can't have completely intrinsic or completely extrinsic motivation usually. So most often we have mixed cases, but more intrinsic motivation is better. More extrinsic motivation is worse. So according to the C. Ryan, we have three basic human needs. Basic means that children are born with those three needs. And what are they? So autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So autonomy, it is about that children from very early on just want to do something because they decided to do something, not because the adults said to do that. So this autonomy can be very small, for example, walking into the direction they chose, or eating when they want to eat, and eating by hands instead of using fork just because they decided to do that. But children really need to have some level of autonomy to grow and develop well-being, because in the case when adults just decide everything and children don't have any autonomy, it negatively affects their well-being and motivation and performance later in life. The second one is competence. So if you're doing something, you want to do it well. So and children actually understand are they doing well or not. Sometimes it's just, again, simple skills, how they put their clothes on, right? Are they walking properly? Are they eating in a clean way? Do they study at school well, and so on? All people want to have something where they feel confident and where they feel that they perform well. Some people perform well at job place. Some people perform well at their hobbies. Some people feel that they're good learners. Some people suppose that they're very good in communication. Some people play computer games very well. So, but everyone needs something to feel competent. It's very important. And the third need is relatedness, need in communication, in relations with other people. So according to DC Ryan, it's a basic need. So children need adults to survive, and we always very social, and we always need other people. So less or more, so people differ, of course, in how strong those needs are, but these are three basic needs typical for all people according to the self-determination theory. So it's more the basic concepts of their theory. Actually, they have a lot of research under the umbrella of the theory and some smaller sub-series. So actually, if you're interested, you can find a lot of more interesting information, but it's a basic related to the motivation and understanding of personality, which you should know. So the last thing, which I suppose is good to mention, is the concept of internalization. So it refers to the active attempt to transform an extrinsic motive into personally endorsed values and assimilate behavioral norms that were originally extrinsic. So this is an interesting process. Sometimes we start doing something because of necessity, because our parents told us to do that, because other people expect us to do that. But it not necessarily means that it will be always extrinsic. Sometimes we find something meaningful in that. Sometimes we start to like what we are doing. Initially, it was extrinsic. We didn't like that. But in the process, we found something important into that, and it becomes part of ourself, part of our intrinsic motivation. So this process is called internalization. I think it adds some depth to the theory. So again, initial external results can become part of inner world. Very interesting. So conclusion for this intrapsychic domain and series of motivation. So motivation is one of the key concepts for understanding personality. It's true, right? So without understanding motivation, we never fully understand a person. It is very true. So how exactly we research motivation can be different, and we consider several theories which belong to this domain. And again, you can read additional information and choose which theoretical orientation is closer to your views on how to research motivation. Historically, there were several attempts to create so-called grand theory of motivation, which explains everything about motivation. Sigmund Freud tried to do that. Abraham Maslow tried to do that. Henry Murray tried to do that. Many people try to do that. The problem is all those theories have limitations. They received fair criticism, and we don't have any universal theory of motivation so far, which will be recognized by the vast majority of psychologists. Unfortunately, maybe it will happen in the future. One of the most modern theories of motivation is self-determination theory. It's still very influential. This theory was heavily influenced by humanistic psychology, so we should recognize that. And finally, self-determination theory actually consists from several smaller theories and has become an umbrella theory, which is uniting many experiments and concepts. And actually, I advise everyone to read a bit more about this. So I intentionally didn't include everything about self-determination theory in this video. So there will be a room for your self-determination and your decision to find some interesting information about motivation. Thank you.